Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's long-range technical forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. This analysis is being provided for perspective only, and any decision made based upon this presentation is the sole responsibility of the person making the decision. Finally, please remember that all long-range weather forecasting is speculative by nature. We start first with an infrared view here from GOES 16 over the last 48 hours or so, and there's several interesting components to this animation that we need to talk about. One, we've really not shut down Gulf of Mexico moisture transport into the midsection of the United States. You can see right here the storms blowing up, there it is, over the southeast on that moisture. You can see the frontal boundary that swept through parts of the Corn Belt. It's coming right through there, bringing multiple clusters of thunderstorms over the last 48 hours through the states like Missouri, Illinois, over into Indiana and Ohio. Early this morning, still raining in parts of Ohio. Those storms did stretch early this morning back into parts of eastern Texas, but going into western parts of Texas over to the Four Corner states, we still have a pretty healthy motion in the atmosphere for the southwestern monsoon. We have seen some pretty massive storms curl around the northern side of that monsoon coming off of the high plains in Wyoming and western Nebraska. It was still producing a little bit of rain midday today through central Nebraska. But in addition to talking about the changes in the pattern that will be happening over much of the central part of North America, we do have to have a bit of discussion about what's going on in the tropics, because we have one open wave right here called Invest 91L. We need to talk about where that's going to go and what its strength might be by the time it gets to the U.S. coastline. And also, we now have our next named tropical system. Here it is. It's called Tropical Storm Gonzalo, which earlier this morning was still classified as a depression. We're going to come back to both of those things in just a few moments. I want to first go, though, to showing you how much precipitation we've received compared to normal over the last 14 days. Now, you might notice this looks a little different than what I normally show you. That's just because I'm migrating a lot of my mapping systems to new machines so that we can actually expand some of our capabilities. But first thing you notice here, this data is only valid through 7 a.m. yesterday on July the 21st. These data are always one day old. But you can see where things have been very wet in parts of the Central Plains, yet we've left some of the drought-stricken areas in parts of Colorado, western Kansas, and pockets in Nebraska very, very dry. There's a lot of attention being paid right now into this sector as well. As you get just to the west of Des Moines, there is a place in there between like Des Moines and Carroll that is very, very dry and has missed out on a lot of the precipitation that had been forecast for that area. A lot of model busts in there over the last week or so as precipitation gets forecast and then doesn't materialize. The southern plains of the United States getting down into Texas, we will be seeing quite a bit of change in this area over the next about 5 days or so as we see Invest 91L, that open tropical wave, close up and possibly impact the coast here, bringing in quite a bit of precipitation. And in the eastern Corn Belt, well, let me at least show you this. This is, again, this goes up into yesterday morning. This is how much rainfall has been received since then. So similar data to what I normally show you, just a different source here. And what we can see is that through parts of Missouri, southern 2/3 of Illinois, then getting over to parts of Indiana and Ohio, some excellent rains over the last 24 hours. Now, some of those rains have come in with some very strong winds and some local damage, but still you're seeing quite a bit of precipitation out of that. Same thing for the storms that came out of parts of Wyoming into Nebraska, northeastern Colorado. Quite a bit of hail reported with this, and some nasty storms up here in parts of the Minnesota and Wisconsin, getting into the UP as well. So let's take all of this and kind of see where this is going, and we're going to come back to our map here that shows how things have really looked over the last couple of weeks. Just this time we're looking at temperatures. Now, what's been interesting is that the heat, as it came in at the beginning of July, did so in brief waves for much of the Corn Belt and the northern plains getting into the Canadian prairies. It didn't last very long. That's the same story that we've seen out in the western United States. They've been not able to hang on to above average temperatures for a while. While the Northeast has seen sustained above average temperatures, and certainly the southern plains and through here has been very, very hot throughout the month of July, it is important to note that for the primary corn and soybean belt, and I know a lot of my viewers are from that area, we certainly see that in this particular region, a lack of sustained heat stress. Okay, so we brought in the heat, but then quickly brought it off here with these weak frontal boundaries, which, to be honest with you, have been very poorly forecast by the models. Much of the southern regions carried a slight warm bias throughout the month of July here, but we need to see how those things are going to be changing in the near term. Because over the next 7 days, we got a couple of interesting things that will be occurring. Initially, a broad ridge will be building into the midsection of the country, and sneaking underneath it will be this tropical system we're going to talk about more in just a few moments. That's going to be bringing in, again, some upper 80s, lower 90s through the Great Lakes states and throughout the Midwest. But the change will happen pretty quickly, and I'm going to watch a front early next week slide through. And while you see the Pacific Northwest showing warm here, this is really coming in after the weekend, this warm-up is. So I'd like to show you that in a little bit more detail. So starting off today, this is what our high temperatures look like for the day on Wednesday, comparing things to normal. So you can see the influence of the monsoon. You can see the influence of the cloud cover in through here, as you can also see after the rain-cooled air passed through in parts of the Great Lakes states of Minnesota and Wisconsin. We're hot in the south, and we're also hot up in part of the high plains, getting up into parts of Montana. But as I play this forward, there's a few critical pieces in the near term I want you to think about. First, see the Northwest remains cool through Thursday and into Friday, and that's because a large ridge begins to build in the midsection of the country. The cooler conditions you see down here are the result of cloud cover and the moisture finally moving in toward this weekend from the first tropical system, but we could be seeing temperatures here that range between 6 and 10 degrees above average. But once again, it's relatively short-lived. The cooler weather in the southwest, again, that's a southwestern monsoon. You see a front is pulling through over the weekend, so this is Sunday's departure from normal. And now look what happens by the time we get into Monday. So there'll be a frontal boundary lingering right in through this area, and as it does so, it could possibly give some decent rains over here into parts of, well, Nebraska, western Kansas, and eastern Colorado. You can see the heat already building in as the pattern remains unblocked in the flow of the jet stream aloft, and so this is going to just be the next wave that comes rolling through. So this is Monday's departure, there's Tuesday, and as you look out beyond the day on Tuesday, we can see the influence of that tropical system bringing in its cloud cover into the parts of the southern plains. But look at this. We're going to be going into next week, the end of July, with temperatures that are going to be 5 to 10 degrees below average, possibly here in the central plains of the United States. So let's take a look at precipitation. Now on that frontal boundary that drapes through, the rainfall right in through this corridor will be critical to hit some of the driest fields, especially as you get into parts of western Iowa and parts of eastern Nebraska. This could also bring much needed rain to this section of Colorado and Kansas, another very dry spot. A lot of what you've seen through here is happening today right now, but we do see parts of the Appalachian Mountains in the Ohio Valley here showing up with some stormy conditions. But the feature that we want to be discussing, I think, here in the near term is going to be this tropical pulse that's going to be hitting some of the driest parts of southern Texas, and it will increase the potential for some flash flooding down in southern Texas and also in southern Louisiana. So looking at where our models are currently forecasting the track, so this is an ensemble approach, we can see that the spread is relatively large, and that's because the flow right now guiding this is weak and the wave is relatively open. So in other words, that larger ridge that's building here over, well, this part of the country is going to help to steer this more towards Texas, and it's going to take it pretty far to the east. Whether it comes in closer to the Rio Grande or if it moves up toward the Red River, that's what's going to be still up in the air because we still have a couple more days to watch this move. In addition to that, we will talk about Gonzalo down here and its potential to strengthen as well, and how active I think the tropics are going to remain as we press through August and into September. Now zooming in a little closer, once again, we can see the potential spread here from the models, but we got to talk about what is going to be controlling this. So I'm going to take you up about a mile above, and we're going to look at a couple of things here. One is vorticity, the spin in the atmosphere, and the second is the heights, in other words, how thick the atmosphere is. So here's our open wave today, and as we play this forward, let's pause it right here, we can see that as that open wave starts to bring more of its moisture on the northern side of it, and you're not seeing that, you're seeing vorticity, but as it brings more moisture on the northern side of it here, this particular system does have the ability, I think, to close off and become a closed circulation. And as a result, if the wind speeds in here do reach a sustained value greater than 38 miles an hour, this will be classified as a tropical storm and be given a name. But as it continues to push toward the Texas coast, I'm not so concerned about the winds, but by the time we get into Friday afternoon and evening and then early Saturday morning, if it does end up coming somewhere between Houston and Corpus Christi, and through this area, we could be seeing some locally very heavy rainfall on some very dry fields. So again, this is coming in Let's see here. This is Saturday, so we're still 3.5 days away from it really getting to that particular spot. Now, this is an operational European model run, and you can see that the latest run wants to take this down through, as you see here, down through the Rio Grande. And whether it does that or not is still largely up to the position of the upper level ridge that's sitting here as part of the steering current with this system. So let's stop watching this, and I do want to see when the other tropical system, Gonzalo, finally starts to make its way through the Caribbean. So we're just moving on out here. There it is. You start to see it. Now, I've got some concern about the survivability of Gonzalo as it moves through the Caribbean, simply due to some increased wind shear, and it actually is chewing on a bit of dusty air to the north, dry, dusty air to the north right now. But should this get through, and by a few things moving around, the steering currents bring it into the Gulf of Mexico, we do need to be paying much more close attention to it. So let's just get the latest update here from the National Hurricane Center on Tropical Storm Gonzalo. Now, what was interesting was that if you had asked me last night, I wouldn't have anticipated the strengthening of this to hurricane status anytime soon. I thought it would stay at tropical storm status, but it could get up to a Category 1 strength hurricane. Why it's forecast to decrease in strength here in the Caribbean is mainly due to much stronger winds in that area. So we have strong trade winds running through the central Caribbean right now. And on the northern side of it, right in here, we have a pretty good push of some drier and dusty air. But the timing of this will be critical to see how it develops once it gets past the Lesser Antilles. Again, these islands right in through here. So there's a lot that is still to be discovered about where Gonzalo will eventually go. I'm going to show you this, but I don't want you to put too much stock into it at this point. This is the GFS model guidance, taking this all the way out pretty far in the forecast here. And what we do want to pay attention to is, should the steering currents bring it eventually into the Gulf of Mexico, the water temperatures in here are relatively warm, and should the wind shear back off, this would just be something that could possibly impact the southern coast of the United States. I'm not trying to introduce any hype into this. We could lose Gonzalo entirely as it gets in here into the Caribbean, but it's just something I want to keep a close eye on as we progress forward through the end of the month of July. There's quite a bit of time for this to continue to evolve here, so we've got some time, and we just need to be patient watching it in its forecast here. Now let's switch back to the extratropics, and this isn't a graph I often show, but I think there's some value to us understanding it. What I've shaded for you over there on the right goes from April 26th all the way to July 21st, and the shaded area represents 180 degrees west to 120 west. So basically that's the international date line all the way over to the western part of the United States. Now what's color shaded here is a blocking index. Now this is put together by NOAA and the CPC, and the higher the value, the greater the block, which means the greater the the greater the meridional flow in the atmosphere versus zonal. Now what I want you to notice is, going back to mid-May, in this area you do not see much of a blocking pattern. We did have some blocking conditions that were here, that were over a little bit farther to the east, so this would have been over Siberia. This could have contributed to the Siberian heat waves and the fires, but overall, much of the North Pacific that plows then into North America has been unblocked. So when I give a long-range forecast, I have to have solid evidence to overturn persistence. In other words, should we continue to expect to see the jet stream doing that? Well, let's start to ask that question and go straight to our models. Now, you've probably noticed as of late the models have not necessarily been in great agreement. They've been moving the ridges around independently of one another, even in their ensembles, and I don't think any of them really truly understand how troughs keep coming out of, well, the Bering Sea through Alaska into the Gulf of Alaska. They've really not captured that process very well. So when I look over here at the GFS ensemble for day 10, so this is now going to be valid on Saturday, August 1st, you see a sizable trough that's sweeping through the Gulf of Alaska. Whereas in the European, there is still a trough here, but it's not nearly to the degree that we see in the GFS. Now the GFS accordingly brings in a ridge into the western United States that goes into a broader trough over the east. And we do see something similar to that, but look at the difference. It's subtle, but look at the difference in the flow in the European. I'll just draw a line through the ridge axis in the European, and now we'll draw one coming through with the with the GFS. And there are subtle differences in here, but these differences are going to make an important change in the precipitation as it's going to be forecast. And look at how much more extensive the upper level trough will be over the eastern part of the United States. So let's immediately see what that means when we look at the models and their attempt to be continuous here with the matching of the heights to the precipitation pattern. We still see both models want to keep the southwestern monsoon going, which would be typical for this time of year. The GFS backing that ridge up and bringing the flow like this wants to keep parts of the southern United States on the drier side of things, but certainly brings more ridge riding storms through, through the midsection of the United States, starting all the way up in the Canadian prairies. Now, why the European has a much broader sector in through here of wetter conditions is primarily due to the depth of that trough. And also, neither model really closes off the Gulf of Mexico. So you can see that the European favors wetter conditions across a broad section of the middle and southern United States and extends it up into the Canadian prairies as well. The drier area that you see up here is mainly due to more convergence in the upper levels of the atmosphere deeper into that trough, but it's extending into the Great Lakes and then up into parts of, Ontario, Quebec, and then into the Hudson Bay. So I'm going to watch that very, very carefully to see which pattern, when we're only a week out, actually materializes. Now, what I think this is going to be most important for is if we just go back, you can see where the precip is forecast to be in week 2. When we combine it all together, I want to start showing you just a little bit different flavor of our soil moisture values. And I should have been using this all along, but I needed to have a few conversations with some colleagues to understand what goes into this particular product. It's a soil moisture product, and it's looking here at moisture percentile in the top 40 centimeters of the soil, so just the top couple of inches. So we can certainly see where we've recently had some heavy rains, but this also tells me where we have got some sizable deficits here at the very top of the root zone for our crops. And so specifically, you can see what's going on here, which makes these rains coming in early next week so critical. You can see the pockets of drought that are in the high plains and all the way down to the southern plains. And then I also notice how dry things are over parts of the eastern Corn Belt getting over toward Pennsylvania. We can't ignore the very wet conditions that have stretched in through here either. So this is going to be a critical map to watch evolve. And why I'm concerned about flash flooding down here is simply because of how dry the soil's been. It tends to get very, what we call pan hard, and as a result you get runoff before you get the water soaking in. So we'll keep you updated by looking at these maps here, soil moisture profile maps. Now, what about temperatures? Day 5 through 10, if we just continue this out, remember that this was the point where the ridge was backing up. So we can see in the European model that where the front does slide through and we still have the tropical cloud cover and moisture. We do see much of Texas going over on the cooler side, and through the center part of the United States, I don't see major warm biases. It's all going to be on the coasts as the pattern begins to evolve here. And as we stretch this out to day 10 through 15, once again, we do see the jet stream still on a more northward trajectory. But again, due to cloud cover and some recent precipitation, we do see cooler conditions in the southern plains with the warmth spreading on the northern side of this. So we have to watch that very carefully because any subtle shifts in the position of that ridge will change that temperature pattern very quickly. So what I want to do to extend this out is let's go look now at week 3 and week 4. On the right, I have week 3 and week 4 temperature anomalies from the CFSV2, which is a US run model. And on the left, I have the European. Now, the CFSV2 has been bouncing around quite a bit, but the European's just been stuck on this kind of persistence mode, which it can't shake. So we're now looking at the time period of August 5th through August 11th. And the European has once again come back during that time period, bringing in some cooler weather as it tries to build a ridge to the west. What then happens is in the following week, so middle of August, the CFSV2 now wants to bring warmth back into this area and back up the cooler weather. Now, when I see that kind of movement, it tells me at least that the model is not attempting to block up the flow. I see change. But you may look over at the two maps that are on the left from the European and go, is there really any difference? And the answer is no, there's really not. And I think it's because the European is washing out a few subtle features by combining 50 different ensemble members, and also it is really hanging on to persistence. In other words, what July gave us, it's trying to just keep that going for the month of August. Remember, we saw it at the beginning, the cooler weather weather in through here. This is now week 3, week 4, with broader heat east, and it's trying to at times bring in much above average temperatures to the northwest. But it has failed to do that and leave those warm temperatures in the northwest up to this point in the summer. Now, what about precipitation? I was a bit surprised today to see better agreement between the models on week 3, week 4. So again, what are the time frames? The 5th through the 11th, those are the top figures, and the 12th through the 18th, those are the bottom figures. Can you see how both models are trying to keep, look at this, this is week 3, week 4. I see similar features here in the models, trying to keep a warm but stormy setup here for the eastern half of the Corn Belt and the central Corn Belt, maybe cooler in the northern Corn Belt, but still stormy. Very interesting pattern. And again, we'll call all of this, of course, into question down here. I expect to still see a lot of scattered storms develop in that area, and we have no idea if any tropical systems could come up through and just wipe that out, because these models won't pick up on those tropical features. So is anything big changing? Well, we got to keep an eye on these ocean temperatures. Certainly in this part of the Pacific Ocean, things are staying quite warm, and that's helping to keep our jet stream north and also zonal. But what's been going on with La Nina? Well, it's been struggling to really maintain a cooler bias across the ocean temperatures here, but it's come right back down to average on those ocean temperatures. Take a look at this. Over the last few days here, we have finally seen the Southern Oscillation Index get back above our zero line, which is right there. So it's gone here at the beginning of July and slowly made this increase and come right up here to some positive numbers. Remember, you have to be way down here to have a negative, to have El Nino-like conditions, and you have to be above about +7 to have La Nina-like conditions. Are we starting to see a surge in La Nina behavior? Well, if it did, and the Southern Oscillation Index just went over positive and stayed positive, we would tend to see a correlation with warmer than average conditions here with cooler in parts of the northwest. All right, that's the correlation. So if the SOI stays positive, that would point toward a warm August. But I don't know that it's going to be able to stay positive. And the reason why is because over the next 15 days or so, we see that going from the 22nd all the way to the 5th of August, this region right in here is showing up blue. So again, that's sitting right in this area on our map. What that blue represents is some low-level, stronger trade winds. Now, if we continue to see those trade winds occupy a large section of the Pacific, especially if we saw all of this over here going over and staying blue, then we would see that negative Southern Oscillation Index disappear. It would stay positive, and we would be talking about a much more robust La Nina. But each time we've seen these trade winds strengthen like this, they've not been able to hang on. So we're going to watch it carefully to see if they do in fact hang on and we go more over into a La Nina-like fall. But at this point, I can't make that call. Plus, remember, we still have to compete with what's been going on in the North Pacific. Here's the last piece I want to show you, all right? If we just said that the Southern Oscillation Index stayed positive and we got a La Nina-like behavior, you're looking at a map that shows you the correlation between precipitation rate and Southern Oscillation Index. So if it goes positive, okay, if the Southern Oscillation Index goes positive, we tend to have a drier fall. Now, for a lot of folks, drying down, given how quickly this crop is advancing, especially for the corn crop, this would be advantageous. But we're going to watch this carefully because I'm not yet set thinking that the Southern Oscillation Index is actually going to stay as positive as it is. And here's my reason why, and the last thing I'm going to talk to you about. The MJO. It's been stuck in phase 1 and 2 for 45, almost 50 days. It's just not moved out of that area. We lost a tremendous amount of momentum in the atmosphere in the tropics as the momentum stalled out, as the MJO stalled out over parts of Africa. Now, we've recently seen some of momentum gain, and you can start to see that the momentum's turning around. Should this go back up in the tropics, this will displace everything that's been setting up in the tropics. That'll change our Southern Oscillation Index, that will change the trade wind strength, and that'll change the moisture and energy transport out of the tropics, giving us a big wild card going into August and September. But I do want you to notice this. Despite all of those changes, look at what's happened up here between 30 north and 60 north. That's where our Pacific jet stream has been living, and it's not really deviated too much from normal in terms of its normal west to east path. Should we start to change out the momentum transport out of the tropics, we may need to watch for a bit more volatility with this. It's just something I want you to all be watching with me as we move forward. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it right here. Thanks for giving me your attention today. Hope you found this analysis useful. And with that, we'll just tell you to look forward to the new updates tomorrow when we can get a better idea where these tropical systems are going and if that front does sag through the middle part of the country like we're anticipating early next week. I'll talk to you again then. Thank you.